If you're listening to us today and if you're with us, it's because you have felt similar to what Kim and I have and many others in the sector. We know that change is inevitable, but the question is it going to happen by design or is it going to happen by default? The Time Transformation Lab exists to make change intentional, coordinated, and equitable. So what we've done over the past 3 years is that we've refined our methodology for facilitating change for people, organizations, and ecosystems. That experience is being brought to bear right now as people, organizations, and ecosystems around the world are navigating disruption and chronic crisis. So we have a methodology that groups people and orgs, and the methodology is as such. We believe that sense making is important because it helps us understand what is changing and why it's changing. We also believe that taking action is important because when you take action, you help organizations, ecosystems, and people move from reflecting to real transformation based on their own perceived needs. So really centering in their context. We also believe in sharing knowledge. We do not gatekeep, and we think that what actually makes us powerful and stronger is sharing. As they say, sharing is caring. So we share what applies, what has worked across the sector and applies what works across the ecosystem as well. So over the past 3 years, turning collaboration and learning into practice, we've created facilitation methods, futures tools, and practical playbooks that organizations are already using. And what we've learned is that transformation takes three things. It takes people who can make sense of the disruption and lead it adaptively and by being very agile. It also takes organizations that can rewire how they operate for equity and resilience. And it takes an ecosystem that spreads what works through trust, networks, and also shared learning. So the Time Initiative or the Time Transformation Lab is for people who are trying to keep the lights on and the seed on what comes next, and who don't want to be alone in doing that. So we have some core learning questions that we really center in everything that we're doing at Time. Time is a learning initiative, which is really the center of what we're doing. We learn and we spread out that learning from the different networks that we're in. We know that there is hope. The hope is that everything that we're doing can be distilled and curated, and it helps and I need to do that again. I've lost track. Okay.
You want to start again?
Yeah.
All from the top?
No, just like the learning. I think I can cut it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna do from here.
I think we can just do it like a podcast. Like it's okay if it's not perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so the purpose of this session that we have today is to share about what we've learned. The hope is that everything we have distilled and curated helps anyone trying to find their way in the shifting sector. We're here to make sense of what's changing. We're here to experiment with alternatives, and we're really just here to support each other in solidarity and to move together in courage and not alone. We have some core learning questions here, and they are questions that have been developed by triangulating from different perspectives. And we have looked at what has worked in the SRHRI and GOs that we have worked with in the very beginning of the Time initiatives. We've also done a lot of learning with sector-wide change makers through working groups and with SRHR CSOs in Kenya. And throughout what we've done is we've looked at the 5 learning questions that we have here to our right. What is actually changing? What's holding back transformation? What does powership look like in practice and not just in principle? What values, relationships, and enabling environments do people need to make change happen? And what new models, power dynamics, and ways of working are emerging across the ecosystem? And finally, how can we turn these reflections into coordinated action and sustained transformation? And that falls very much into those 3 points that we had talked about: making sense of what's happening, taking action, and then also sharing the learnings. And that's what we've done with these 3 working groups and these 3 stakeholders within our ecosystem. I'll pass it over to you, Kim, to talk to us about some of the sense making we've made.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey of sense making, and what we've realized by talking to hundreds of people is that people are feeling overwhelmed by all that has happened and is happening this year. And no wonder. As Aisha said, one way to combat the feeling of overwhelm is through gaining clarity. And so let's start. Let's start by understanding what's happening in the broader social good sector. So what's happening? What we know is this is what we're seeing as a sector as a whole. What is happening is that organizations are under real pressure. Hold on one second. This is going to be fun editing. All right, so this is what we're seeing across the system as a whole. What we know is that organizations are under real pressure. There is less resources, whether that is money or people or time. The data you see here is from the Global Aid Freeze survey, which says that, let me do it again. That was the wrong slide.
What was happening to me is I was reading the facilitation notes and not looking at the slides, and I was getting confused. I should have just spoke to the slides, but anyway.
Exactly, exactly. Okay. Um, All right, so this is what we are seeing across the system as a whole. We know that organizations are under real pressure. They have fewer resources as a whole. That is less money, less staff, and less time. The data you see here is from the Global Aid Freeze survey, and what it says is that 62% of nonprofits as of, I believe, June this year had up to 6 months of financial resources remaining. 54% were thinking about either restructuring, as in merging, or open to that discussion. And 33% had already closed their offices or were at risk of closure, full stop. Which none of which are great statistics, right? Organizations are in survival mode. We also know that this is a systems level reckoning. So the social, systemic, and sector-wide norms and systems are definitely being dismantled. They're being reshaped, and they're being done so at a radical, quick pace. What that there's fragmented funding that is happening. There's societal pressures, and it's leading to uncertainty, confusion, and just a really complex operating environment. So what it looks like is that we are at a crossroads. This is a space of transition and tension. We are caught between this collapsing dominant system and emergent new ones, all while trying to navigate survival at the same time and striving for impact in the work that we do. So no wonder it feels overwhelming. So that's what's happening, but what does it feel like? This year has been more than just information overload. We really can't underestimate the impact that this change has for people, for organizations, for the broader sector. These are deeply personal issues. And what it's feeling like is that people are feeling grief. They're feeling betrayal for a system that often they gave their lives and livelihoods to. There is a general sense of vulnerability and pessimism, and that values are under attack. At the same time, many are feeling this sense of freedom or liberation, as in, finally, this thing we've been talking and working towards for so long, there is finally this window of opportunity for real, legitimate, systemic change. We don't know how long that window of opportunity will be open for. So it's important to understand that even for whether you sit in one of those camps or both of those camps, which is okay, this is a lot of disruption, and any disruption is going to be hard and uncomfortable, even good disruption. It's also important to note that from everything that Aisha and I have, all the people we have spoken with, the emotional responses are visceral because they are tied to power. Power is not neutral. So for some, it feels like liberation. For some, it feels like loss. And both of those can coexist and both of them can be valid. So here are some quotes that we've just pulled that from all of our listening sessions. The ones on the top are saying that people are feeling the grief of losing their colleagues, losing their peers, losing the brightest, the best and the brightest. And there is this also a feeling of survivor's guilt for those who are still staying and working in their organizations. What sticks out for you, Aisha?
A quote that really sticks out to me, and Kim had talked about that in the sense making that we have done in the past few months, where some people feel like they're grieving and some people feel relieved, and some people also feel a bit in between, skeptical. And it's a quote that reads, "We are still in a power over dynamic donors and large INGOs deciding the terms. Moving towards a power to and a power with is essential for real transformation." And we've heard a lot of talk in the sector about power shifting, and we're at a state now where again we can either transform by design or default, but really ensuring that in our process and of doing that, we're centering local actors. And from the working groups and the spaces that Kim and I have held, we have heard quite a bit of skepticism for those who are on the ground in the global south and local actors, but then also a sense of optimism. And what we think is important is to create that bridge and build a bridge between those two things. And we've seen that solidarity really is at the heart of that. And that's why that quote really resonates with me.
Yep. And then one last one that I'll kind of highlight is that amidst all the change, the movement is under attack, and there's this kind of shadow, this imagery of shadow hanging over the work that we're doing. So at the same time we're trying to re-envision this emergent system, we're also having to defend our legitimacy as a movement through the fog of misinformation and disinformation. And there's just a lot of tension there that that so many people are navigating right now. So how do we make sense of all of this? When we put it together, we do know that we are in the middle of a systems level change event. So it's across the whole system. And so how do we make sense of this all? Well, we at the Time Initiative have spent the whole year kind of grappling with this question, and we've come up with 2 different frameworks that have helped us make sense of this moment. And so we wanted to offer it to you. The first is a framework. It is a lens through which to understand the world. It's called the 2 loops model. You'll see the first loop is the dominant system, and it is in decline. Starting at the beginning of this year, this dominant system has been in rapid decline as funding and priorities have dramatically shifted across the globe. And what that means is that those who probably used to play the role of stewards and stabilizers of the traditional system are now kind of operating as hospice workers, helping things that are no longer serving, are no longer able to be done, to die out, frankly, to compost out. And that requires grieving, it requires honoring what was, and it requires helping people to move forward. At the same time, there was always this new system being built. There were these trailblazers and innovators that were trying new things, calling for change. And so that work is continuing, and in many places is gaining traction and momentum. You'll see the bridge builders are the ones that are going to be moving from the old system over to the new. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of experimentation that needs to be done in that transition. So if you see yourself in multiple places on this model, you are not alone. We need all the roles. And you may sometimes see yourself as a hospice worker, sometimes as a bridge builder, and sometimes kind of as that midwife bringing in the new. You may also feel different from where you would place yourself to where you would place your organization. And oftentimes that's where people are feeling tension, where they see themselves as an innovator, but their organization, for example, may be part of the stabilizing system. We are going to be living through multiple systems at once for some time, and this is going to be a skill at navigating that we will all have to get comfortable with. The second framework or model that we would like to offer with you is what we can learn from the forest. So for you storytellers out there, this one is for you. for me, key to making sense of this moment is the notion of resilience. And I'd like to explain a little bit more what I mean by resilience, because it is a term that's getting thrown around quite a lot. When we think about nature, we know that resilience isn't about the strength of any single tree. It's about the health of the whole forest. A resilient forest is thriving because it is diverse, it is interdependent, it is adaptable. So you have your tall trees that kind of take up all of the space in the forest. You have the showy flowers that also get a lot of attention, but then you also have the little pollinators and the insects that do a lot of the hidden work, and the fungi underground that are all playing different but essential roles. And the same goes for our sector. You have individuals, organizations, networks, each contributing something incredibly vital to the ecosystem. We know that strong forests invest in their roots. They store nutrients that way. They share information through underground networks. They sustain each other during hard times. And what that looks like in our world is shared values, shared culture, trusted relationships, and steady feedback loops that are helping us to adapt. Because what happens when a shock hits? In a forest, you can imagine a massive earthquake or something man-made like deforestation. When that happens, the soil is shifting, the resources, the water flows are changing, the communication networks breaks. And that's what's happened within our sector. In a forest, some trees die when that happens, and the forest doesn't ever look the same. We had a deep systemic shock, disrupting how we have operated for quite a long time. One quote that a participant shared that really has resonated with us is, "I feel like I am a plant planted in the soil, and the soil has been poisoned." So the question is, when that happens, what do we do? Well, we know that when this happens in forests, the forests regenerate. They don't just bounce back to the old way, they regenerate. So new life grows in unexpected places. A tree may fall down, but that leaves open light for that seedling that may not have been noticed before to really thrive. Our task in our work right now is not to just adapt to soil that's depleted, it's to regenerate the soil that we are planted in itself. How do we rebuild trust? How do we rebalance power? How do we nurture those conditions for the new systems to take root? So that is how we have been gaining clarity around what is happening in this last year and beyond. And that can help reduce some of the overwhelm. But we are increasingly coming across leaders at all levels who are suffering from analysis paralysis because they really just don't know what's going to happen. So if I don't know what the future holds, how am I supposed to make the best decisions for myself and for those people around me? So let's try and get some clarity around the future. What we've done through many, many different conversations with many, many different stakeholder groups around the globe is to start thinking about what is possible, what is probable, and what do we prefer? What do we want? So this is not a forecasting tool. This is a sense-making tool. Its purpose is really to help us explore where we might be headed and what choices that we have. And this matrix is all downloadable on the website as well. So you'll see here two axes, one going from promising to harmful, one going from possible to probable. And what you'll see on the left-hand side is what you are looking at is what happens if nothing changes. All of the different probabilities if nothing is changing. On the bottom right, this is what happens if we drift, if we start to go into really harmful spaces. And then the top right is the futures that we are hoping for. So what might we be able to forecast? If we think about sector reform, on the one hand, there is a real chance for real reform in terms of roles, powers, and alliances, how we are relating and working with each other. But on the more negative side, on the other hand, there really could be more of the same, and we just use a lot of nice sounding jargon, but there is just fragmentation that very quickly turns into incoherence.
And when we look at government and funding systems, on one hand, local governments enable civil society organizations to really take ownership and control over the funding agenda. But then at the other hand, there is less money, more resistant to collaboration, and then a creation of a system that has new actors, but the same old hierarchy. So really looking at that legitimacy of this new system that we're seeing.
Yep, for sure. When we think about organizational models, on the one hand, the chronic crises that organizations are facing right now have the potential to unleash new and better models. So new ways of thinking, new ways of working, and new ways of structuring themselves. On the other hand, everyone is underfunded, and so there will likely be constriction of organizations that has the potential to be chaotic and not deliberate.
And an important one when we're thinking about narratives and culture is that on one hand, civil society emerges as an essential and true solidarity increases across the ecosystem. But then on the other hand, civic spaces get even smaller
Yep.
than they are today.
There's a lot of talk these days about experimentation, trying new things, and learning as we go. So on the one hand, we may get really good at trying these things, at taking risks and at learning out loud, having the connective tissue where we can learn from each other. But on the other hand, there is the potential that we can keep experimenting in ways that are extractive and that are performative, and we keep staying risk averse.
Yeah. And there's a lot of talk on technology and AI and the great stuff about it. But, on one hand, technology increases our ability to access information, increases our capacity. But then on the other hand, it is something that can serve as dividing the digital space even deeper. AI can be used as surveillance, and it can also be used to increase misinformation and disinformation. Yeah.
So all of this is complex because the system is complex. It's really impossible to simplify reality. Our goal here is really to make it discussable, and there are tools and prompts to help you and your organization take this and think about how to apply it from a scenario and a strategic planning perspective within your space. So how do we make sense of all what's happening right now? This is the preferable future, the one that we are saying, wouldn't it be amazing if this is where we moved towards? Wouldn't it be the future that we would like to move in the direction towards, where there is local leadership and agenda setting, where we are working as a collaborative ecosystem oriented sector, where that is continuously learning and adapting and growing, where there are still international NGOs, but they are operating in a different way. Their role is different. And we have taken control of the narrative and are seen as not symbolic and not, but essential, really, where we are using technology for good, not evil. And we have resources that are long-term and coordinated, not fragmented, which is leading to resilient and connected systems. Wouldn't that be a place that we would all love to work and live in? So what this means is that we all need to operate and act towards that preferable future. It means we need to amplify the enabling trends and actively reduce the conditions that are leading to the constraining outcomes. And what that is going to require is intention at every level. What I can do myself, what I can do within my community, my organization, and the system. All right, Aisha, what does this mean? How do folks who want to continue to navigate this complex system, what do they need to know?
What do you need to know? One of the things that we have learned, as you can see here, is that disruption does not necessarily mean transformation. And a lot of times we think that if something disintegrates, well, then it has to transform. No, not necessarily. What we've learned is that system collapse does not guarantee transformation without intention, attention, and narrative power. So we need to recreate the same. We need to be very careful that we're not recreating the same old dynamics, but in new forms. And when we think about the two loop model that Kim had presented, and even going back to some of the quotes that we had, this is a legitimate fear. And we need to be very intentional about not duplicating that. Another thing that we're learning is to know your role and to do it well. So nobody can do everything, and trying to do everything is actually pointless. But transformation strengthens when each one of us is aware of the space that we hold, so even the positionality that we have, the context that we come from, and also how unique our influence is in the spaces that we're navigating in. And we really believe that having clear roles strengthens sort of the transformative process. We also learned that regenerating the soil, regenerate the soil that you're planted in, which means we change systems by tending to what is within each organizations, the partnerships that we have, the networks, and also the communities. If each of us regenerates the soil that we're in, together we can enrich and widen the ecosystem for a newer and healthier paradigm. And it's really just making use of what we have, being pragmatic with the tools that we have, and knowing that we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to strengthen that wheel, right? One thing that we love, Kim and I, which is ripples and networks matter. So no single project, no single entity, organization can change the system. And I think this speaks very much to the core of what we've learned at time, being with the SRHRI NGOs we've worked with the SRHR CSOs, but then also the sector-wide. What we've believed that when you can build trust, shared values, and when you can align direction through a ripple from different networks, almost like a domino effect, you can change multiple things in tandem. And we really believe that small connected actions create momentum that is more than the sum of its parts. Clarity, overwhelm, empowerment, helplessness, all of those complex emotions that we've all felt. And they're really easy to feel because I think it's fair. We're human and humans respond to things in a very emotional and physical way. But what we believe is that when we shift to an atmosphere that is clear of purpose and empowerment to act, so making sense of things, but then also taking the action, we believe that coming together to make sense of this moment and rehearsing the futures through experimenting, even this tiny small steps, can really build towards a collective confidence and also new possibilities. And then one thing that we've heard quite a bit, and one thing that we're still learning, is that leadership requires courage and clarity. We have heard from many organizations where board members also need to be involved in this transformative process. But transformation does take courage because it's new, it's different, and it can feel that way. So transformative leadership means standing in the discomfort, speaking the hard truths, and holding long-term vision even when we're under pressure. So, lessons on how to design and hold transformative spaces. One of the things that Kim and I have done throughout this process in this past few months is really to hold space, because we really believe that the real question keeps coming back to how do we make this conversation, how do we make sure that conversations don't end in the spaces that we have? And some of the things that we've really learned that have stood out are four things. The process is the intervention. I love saying this, but essentially what it means is that transformation is not only what we build, but it is how we build it. So it speaks to how we collaborate, how we invite, whose knowledge we center, and the actual work is shifting power in the process of doing that. Another thing that we've learned is sense making and experimenting together. So we believe that transformation doesn't come just due to one big idea. We believe that transformation comes from very small and consistent ideas, conversations, spaces, and experiments. So one thing that we have done a lot when we're going through this transformative process is that we ask questions of like, what assumptions are we carrying? who decides what when we are shifting power or transforming, and then also what's one small thing that we can do and test in our ecosystem as people and in the organizations that we find ourselves in to really just shift things, whether it's we're trying to move power, whether it's we're trying to make things more equitable, but just in transformation. And what time really does is it holds that space. It really allows for transformation to happen with a mixture of deep reflection, but then also practical action, and then in a safe space with fellow stakeholders within the ecosystem that can really ask some of those very tough questions. Another thing that we've learned is naming what usually goes unnamed, and we believe that this takes courage. We believe that it can be very uncomfortable, but it's necessary because that is how trust is built. So one thing that we really try to pay attention to through the time transformation lab is where the silent lies. So whether it is on race, gender, privilege, proximity to resources, etc. Another thing, the last thing, which we think is very important, is relationships. We believe that relationships are very strategic. In this sector, relationships are often seen as soft stuff. But we really believe that relationships are the system because the people are who create the system, the people are who move the system, and the people are who can transform the system. So the way we relate from fronter to grantee, I mean, from the north to the south, from organizations to community, from INGO to CSO, all of this really determines the future of what we're capable of building. And that's exactly what the Time Initiative is focusing its energy on, strengthening the connective tissue that allows trust, accountability, and also resilience to grow. Is there anything else, Kim, that you would want to add that we've been learning?
I think just that people are ready to work together and to be in solidarity. I think this is a moment that people are recognizing is hard, is overwhelming, is complex, and all of those truths are real. And there is a real need, and I think people are yearning almost for to be in solidarity and community with each other.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, this brings us to the end of the reflection that we've done, but we hope that this will be a benefit to you as a person, for your organization, and for the ecosystem that you find yourself in. And please, we really rely on the ripple effect. So share this to your network. Let us know what you think about what you're learning. Is there something that we're missing out? A huge part of what we do is really just consolidating everything and making it tangible so that anybody in the sector can use it. As Kim mentioned, we have a lot of tools and resources that can also be used and put into your respective contexts. And we thank you very much for listening to us.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye. Bye. Okay.